Take a little break to talk about the inyanim of Shabbos. And I had mentioned yesterday the great Hasidic Avort on Lo Suvaru Eish B'chol Moshvasechem, do not burn fire on Shabbos. So this is a remez not only to the malacha of fire, but it's a remez to the idea that on Shabbos one has to be very, very careful to keep away from the fire of machlokas. That in order to be zocheh to the blessings of Shabbos, one tries to be in a state of shalom, not to burn the fire of machlokas. And I had mentioned that is why there's badafka, a special Yetzer Hara on Erev Shabbos, to get into fights, particularly when you're married, because things aren't ready or whatever it would be. And this is because the Yetzer Hara wants to prevent the Kedusha of Shabbos from elevating you. And the best way to prevent the Kedusha of Shabbos from working is by entering Shabbos in a state of machlokas and ketata. Now, the truth of the matter is, though, that there are two different aspects of this. One aspect is that shalom is like a chicken and an egg problem. Shalom is necessary for Shabbos to elevate you, but it also works the other way, that Shabbos can give you a bracha of shalom. In other words, I start off with shalom, so Shabbos enters my neshama, and then I get elevated and experience more inner peace, more tranquility. That is why, for the Birchas Kriya Shema, right, the last bracha of Shema, Hashkivenu, for Ma'ariv. So during the week, what do we say? Ushmor tzeisenu vo'enu l'chaim u'l'shalom yatav v'olam. Hashem should watch us coming and going. Baruch atah Hashem, shomer amo Yisrael ad. He guards us. That's during the week. On Friday night, right? What is the nusach? Ufros aleinu sukas shalomecha. Spread over us your canopy of shalom. Baruch atah Hashem hapores sukas Shalom aleinu v'al kol amo Yisrael v'al Yerushalayim. So you see very, very clearly that Shabbos is connected with Shalom, and indeed that is why at least in Hebrew the greeting is Shabbat Shalom, because Shabbat is about Shalom, feeling that inner peace, that inner serenity, which in turn connects you to God. So seen in this way, I don't know if any of you have, I'm sure you have, if you've ever davened in a Hasidic minyan or a Hasidic shtibel, so you may notice that Friday afternoon, before Mincha of Erev Shabbos, the last weekday tefillah, before Mincha, they recite a long kapitel of Tehillim, which is Kuf Zayin, 107. Now, Kuf Zayin is actually halachically a very important kapitel. It is actually the source of all of the halachas of Bentching Gomel. Right? What's Bentching Gomel? The Gemara in the 9th parak of Brachos tells us that if a person is faced with a dangerous situation and Hashem has saved them from that dangerous situation, we'll talk about what dangerous situation is. So you recite a bracha in front of a minyan, only it has to be a minyan, and that is bracha to Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hagomel l'chayavim tovos. Hashem has done good, kindness for chayavim, for those who are undeserving. Shegamalani kol tov, that Hashem has done good for me, even though I don't deserve it. And people answer, Mi shegamalcha kol tov, Hashem who has done good for you, hu yigmalcha tokov, may He continue to do good for you. Right? This is called Bentching Gomel. Now the Gemara says in Maseches Brachos, there are 4 situations where a person has to bench Gomel. One situation is he is on a journey on sea, water, and there's turbulence in the water like a storm. The other is he is wandering in the desert and he's lost. The third is he is imprisoned and is released from prison. And the fourth is he was sick, we don't mean a cold, but seriously ill, and he recovered. These are the 4 situations where the halacha says you bench Gomel. Now, the poskim then generalize it, and they say that these 4 are lav dafka, but any dangerous or hazardous situation, a person benches Gomel. So, for example, if you walked into East Jerusalem and there was a riot going on, or your car, sometimes it happens, See, in Israel, if you take the wrong turn on the road, you can be in big trouble. You might wind up in Palestinian territory, and they see an Israeli license plate, and whatever it would be. You don't want to be in that situation. It may very well be you'll have to bench Gomel, even though it doesn't fit one of the four situations per se. Now, it's common. Most of us, Baruch Hashem, most of us usually don't have serious dangers, but the most common situation where we bench Gomel is typically when we come back from an overseas trip. We flew on an airplane. So that's really not so pashut. Although the minhag is that when we fly, we bench Gomel. The question is, why is that so? So some say the only reason you bench Gomel is because you're flying over water, and therefore you have to fall within the category of water travelers. In other words, if it was a completely flight over dry land, like you're going from New York to California or something, Yutaka would not bench Gomel. So some connected to the water aspect, and some connected to the general dangers of flying. So whether it's land or not. In fact, I have a friend who is a pilot, and he tells me that flying over water is actually safer than flying over land, because if God forbid, you don't want to be in either situation, but if God forbid there has to be a crash landing on water is actually safer because the impact is much less, and they have boats and flotation devices and other stuff. If you, God forbid, you have to crash on land, land is hard. So he actually said water landing is less dangerous. So it would be a little anomalous that you bench Gomel for water transportation. And besides, flying generally, although obviously, crashing is very scary, and I do not like to fly for that reason, but the truth is, statistically speaking, flying is much safer than driving. So I mean, why do you bench Gomel for air travel, and you don't bench Gomel, if you're driving from here to Tel Aviv, besides Tfilas Haderech, one might wonder whether you should bench Gomel. In fact, sometimes in Israel, crossing the street, you wonder whether you should bench Gomel. It's an interesting question. Okay. The point I'm making is, though, that the poskim have understood that the four categories in the Gemara are lav dafka. Now, a woman after childbirth benches Gomel because she is nichlal in chola, a sick person, because childbirth and labor are life-threatening conditions. That's nichlal in chola shenisrapa. Interesting, I should just point out that many people have the minhag that the husband benches Gomel for his wife. That is actually not the best minhag. The best minhag is, or the best way of keeping the halacha is, the woman herself should bench Gomel, and you need a minyan for Gomel, though. In other words, she can't just bench at home, and that would mean either a minyan is brought to her house, or after shul, she's here in shul, so 10 men will come, and she will bench Gomel. So even though it may sound marginally a little less tznius, in point of fact, it is better for the woman herself to bench Gomel than for her husband to bench Gomel for her. Yeah.
What's the connection of Gomel to reading the Sefer Torah? I know people generally do it around.
Okay, so the rule is this. Again, the rule is that Birkas HaGomel requires a minyan. That is absolutely the case. You cannot bench Gomel b'yechidus. Right? You need a minyan. So as a result, going all the way back to Chazal, people didn't always daven in a minyan, but for Torah reading, they all came together. So it's simply a question of doing it when there's likely to be a minyan. Now today, you would figure, lav dafka Torah reading, let it be after davening, and it can be. Lamai say it can be. If you didn't bench Gomel by Kriyas HaTorah, you can bench Gomel after davening too. You just need a minyan. That's the only requirement that you have to have. Now, why am I talking about Birchas HaGomel? What does that have to do with anything? Well, Birchas HaGomel is derived from Tehillim Kuf Zayin. Because Tehillim Kuf Zayin, 107, David HaMelech is describing these four dangerous predicaments. He talks about people who are lost at sea, and the ship is being tossed and turned like a drunk who is walking around in circles. And there's such a fear of death. And when Hashem finally brings us to safety, there's a refrain, there's a chorus that's repeated 4 times. Yodu Lashem Chasto. Give thanks to Hashem for His loving kindness. Right, so that's after difficulty A, give thanks. And then it talks about the desert wanderings. And then it says, Yodu Lashem Chasto. And then it talks, again, I don't remember the order, then it talks about the sickness, Yodu Lashem Chasto. And then it talks about the imprisonment. Again, I'm not giving you the order. In other words, after each of these sarais, there is a chorus. The pasuk is repeated. Yaidu Lashem Chasto v'niflaosav livnei Adam. Okay, you may know there's also a niggin put to those words as well, which I will not sing right now. So this is the source of Gomel. These are the four people that have to give thanks because David HaMelech said, Yaidu Lashem Chastei. So halachically, this is the paradigm of Gomel. Now, as I say, we do generalize Gomel beyond the four situations. And it's interesting, there seems to be a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. It's very, very interesting. Maybe Israelis are used to dangerous situations and it doesn't bother them. I mean, let me give you an example. Let's assume you're sitting in a bus and the seat in back of you is empty. Nobody's sitting there. And a big boulder, a big rock smashes the window right in back of you and lands on the seat in back of you. I don't know. As an American, I would say, oh, you bench Gomel for that, for sure. Because, it was only 3 inches from you and it could have killed you. But I hear Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael saying, well, did it go in your row or was it the row in back of you? They say, oh, the row in back of you? What's the danger? It's like the rock has to graze you and then you bench Gomel. If the rock misses you by 2 inches, that's not a sakana. So I don't know. There seems to be a greater tolerance for danger here than there would be for Americans. So I think Americans make Gomel more than Israelis, but the general idea of sakana is very clear. Now here's the issue. Okay, that's great. What does that have to do with Shabbos? Hasidim read chapter Kuf Zayin before Mincha. There is not a reference to Shabbos. Now, Tehillim Tzadik Beis, which is Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos, that's also not about Shabbos. That's another kasha. But at least it says it was written for Shabbos. What's the shaykhus to Shabbos is another question. But Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos. But this doesn't have anything. This does not say it's a Mizmor for Shabbos. And it's not about Shabbos. It's about thanking Hashem when you're in danger. And Hashem took you out of danger. So number one, who made the minhag of reciting this psalm before Mincha? So it actually goes back to the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was masaking that Mizmor Kuf Zayin should be recited before we get into Shabbos. We recite it before the last Mincha, the last Tfilas Kol of Shabbos. What's the shaykhus? What's the connection? What does it have to do with Shabbos? So here, there's a deep Havana, a very beautiful Havana, that the Baal Shem Tov understands that these 4 dangers that David HaMelech are describing are not just dangers of the guf, they are dangers of the neshama. And Hashem brings you to safety. Shabbos is the safety that will help you heal from the sorrows of the neshama. And therefore the Baal Shem Tov wanted people to understand that there are sicknesses of the soul just like there are sicknesses of the body. And just as there are doctors and hospitals for the body, in fact the Rambam makes this point. The Rambam was a great doctor. And the Rambam uses the mashal over and over again, that bad midos are sicknesses. Gaiva, selfishness, depression, these are sicknesses of the soul. And the same way when you have a sickness of the body, you go to doctors who understand the body. When you have sicknesses of the soul, you have to go to the doctors of the soul. And these are the Chachmei Torah. These are the wise, the sages of Torah that know how to heal the neshama. And the Baal Shem Tov wants us to understand as we enter Shabbos that Shabbos is about healing the neshama. It is the safe refuge that God brings us to heal the dislocations and the illnesses of our soul. So let's go over the 4 and show how the tzara of the guf corresponds to a tzara of the neshama. The first, again, I do remember that the first one that's mentioned is the sea So the first one is the person that's lost at sea, and the ship is moving around, and he's like a shicker, it says. He's like a drunk person who is simply reeling around without able to even get his balance. Now we know that water, in a good sense, is a mashal for Torah. But water, in a bad sense, is a mashal for taiva and hedonism. Water is pleasurable, refreshing. So being lost at sea, drowning in the sea, is a mashal for a Baal Taiva who is so meshuka in the Havlei Olam Hazeh, the hedonism, the Gashmias, the materialism, that he can't take himself away from it. He's addicted to whether it's food or sex or alcohol or drugs or making money. His life is totally involved. That's the one who is drowning in the ocean or lost at sea. Now, the second one is the sick person. Now, sickness can refer to bad midos. I'm sick. I have jealousy. I have anger. I have resentment. I have hatred. I have depression. I have low self-esteem. I have arrogance. These are sicknesses of the soul. Okay, it's not so much about taiva. Right? The Baal Taiva, that's another sickness. But taiva is you want to get pleasure. Sickness is you're not even looking for pleasure. You're just filled with angers, resentments, hatreds, bitterness. That's a sickness of the soul. Now the third one is the prisoner who gets out of jail. Now that's a level that might even be worse. The prisoner is the person who is so locked in that he no longer feels. See, the sick person has strong feelings. The locked-in person just doesn't feel anymore. They're kind of dead inside. Eli Wiesel used to say that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Hate and love can actually coexist. You can actually hate someone that you love, at least momentarily, because you feel for them, you're connected to them, and that creates passion. Marriage counselors will say that when husband and wives are angry at each other, there's actually hope for the marriage, because each one still cares. But at the point at which, I really don't care, that may be the point of no return. That's because you're dead. So that's the difference here. Again, lost at sea, meshuka b'taiva. Sick, filled with negative feelings. Imprisoned, the feelings are gone. Now, the last one is actually positive. Wandering in the desert, looking for water. That's the spiritual seeker who is looking for wisdom, but is looking in the wrong places. The desert is not a great place to look for water. That's the spiritual seeker who is looking at Buddhism or Christianity. In other words, it's a positive thing that they're looking, but they're looking in the wrong places. So David HaMelech, the Baal Shem Tov is telling us, is identifying 4 physical dangers, but it actually corresponds to 4 spiritual predicaments that we have. I'm meshuka in taiva. And, you can have both. I'm filled with negative feelings. Loathing of others and self-loathing. Or I'm just dead inside. I don't feel at all. Or I'm looking for meaning, but I don't know where to go. This is a danger to the soul. And when God shows us chesed and brings us to safety, one of the ways that he does that is by giving us Shabbos. Shabbos is the hospital for the broken soul. Shabbos is the medical treatment for the sickness within the soul. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov was misaking to read that kapitel before Shabbos, to know that Shabbos can cure all that ails you. And it's Hashem taking you out of the danger and putting you in a safe place. Now, that doesn't mean, like everything in Ruchnius, that doesn't mean that we will always experience that. Because nothing is automatic. We say, Shabbos, you get an extra soul, an neshama yesera. Now, what does it mean to have an extra soul? Or actually, one might say an enlarged soul. It's not like I have one soul and I get another soul, but rather, my soul gets enlarged. What does it mean to have either an extra soul or an enlarged soul? Rashi, in Maseches Beah, says, you're given the extra soul, or the enlarged soul, so you can eat and drink more on Shabbos than you do during the week. Right, Shabbos, I can eat more because I'm eating for two. Now, one might say, that's what it is, neshama yesera, that's why I can have more cholent on Shabbos than during the week. That seems maybe a little bit of a trivialization of it. But some want to say that when Rashi talks about eating or drinking, Rashi means the neshama eating or drinking. We find this by Matan Torah. It says that Aaron and Nadav and Avihu and the 70 elders were gazing at the Shekhinah. Vayochlu vayishtu, and they were eating and drinking. Now, some Mefarshim learn this was an Aveira. They actually were physically eating, and that's why they got punished. That's how some Mefarshim learn. But the Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim that the eating and the drinking was not physical, but rather, just as the body gets nutrition from food, the soul gets nutrition by thinking about Hashem. And therefore, literally, it was soul food. Soul food does not mean fried chicken or collard greens from Harlem or whatever it is. Soul food is ruchnius. And that's called vayechlu, vayishtu. Mimela, perhaps you could say that when Rashi says on Shabbos, you get neshama yesera. Well, the Gemara says, but Rashi says, for achila ushasiya. Maybe Rashi means the achila ushasiya of Matan Torah. And so neshama yesera, in other words, means an enhanced capacity to absorb ruchnius. But here's the thing. That's the good news. The bad news is, or the difficult news is, or the challenging news is, that capacity and potential is not the same as actualization. I have an enhanced ability to connect to God on Shabbos. But that doesn't mean I will connect to God on Shabbos. It just means I can connect to God on Shabbos. But whether I will or I won't, or how much will I do it, that's not up to Hashem. That's already the realm of free will. So Hashem gives you an enhanced capacity. It then becomes our responsibility to utilize that capacity. That's why it's not automatic. I mean, Shabbos is elevating for everybody, but, sometimes it didn't do that. We don't feel that it did so much for us. But that's not Shabbos' fault. That's our fault. That's why, indeed, there is such an inyan. When Chazal say, in fact, you can take this idea of eating further. It says, Mi shemechen b'Shabbos, erev Shabbos, yerchel b'Shabbos. He who prepares on erev Shabbos will eat on Shabbos. Now, in terms of physical food, that's very true. If you want to have good food on Shabbos, you got to prepare. Now, prepare can be a lot of ways. Prepare could mean cooking it. Prepare can mean buying it. Or prepare can mean calling up for a good invitation. All of that is preparation. But if you don't do one of those three, you're not going to have it. Right? That's simple. You got to do something to have the food. But I would add, derech drush, that also applies to the spiritual food. If you want the spiritual food of Shabbos, you got to prepare. You got to think about it ahead of time. Did you want to say something? Did you have your hand up? Or? Yeah.
So when you're talking about, I think it was what Rashi was saying, does it have to be either or physical or spiritual, or can it be both?
I think it could be both. And again, for Shabbos in particular, keep in mind, there is a mitzvah to eat and drink good food. And if that's done with the right kavanah, that is part of what can elevate you spiritually too. Because you can use the food, like people say, l'chavod Shabbos kodesh. Some people, every spoonful. Okay, I'm not saying you have to do that or you should do that, but at least it's something we should think about, that this is a way we honor Hashem. So yeah, we don't have that dichotomy that the physical is bad and the spiritual is good. The physical can also be used in a positive way. So one should take time on Erev Shabbos. It's been one of the problems, well, there's so many problems, but one of the issues of the yeshiva world generally, it's an obvious problem, is what is Friday about? Because, Friday, the learning is short, right? Because we have to prepare for Shabbos. So the truth is, what does a single guy have to prepare for Shabbos? I mean, in a way, like, what do you have to do, if I may ask? You don't have to tell me. But you don't necessarily have a tremendous amount to do, but you got to prepare for Shabbos. But one should use the time. So good. So even if maybe you need a little time off, the heavy learning might be difficult. Okay, I understand. But one should take, even if it's a half an hour, even if it's 15 minutes, to think about Shabbos, to learn something like Shir HaShirim, to read Shir HaShirim, and to try to understand the words, the love between Hashem and Am Yisrael, and kind of prepare for Shabbos. And that's Nichlal in Mi Shemechen Be'erev Shabbos is Yeichel B'Shabbos, right? So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And even if you want to be a chassid, and recite Tehillim Kuf Zayin, I think with this machshava it would make sense, because I can tell you, if you would recite it without really understanding this message, it really wouldn't make a lot of sense to you. We're talking about people lost at sea, and people that's sick, and people in prison, and people wandering the desert, and Hashem saves them, Baruch Hashem, but what does it have to do with anything? But the Baal Shem Tov is giving us a very, very deep message, that it refers to the sicknesses of our soul, and how Shabbos can heal. Now, the emes is, just as Shabbos is a hospital in time for a sick neshama, Eretz Yisrael is said to be a hospital in space for a sick neshama. Somebody once asked Rav Kook, why is there so much machlokas here? Why is everybody fighting all the time over everything? Religious, secular, religious, Hasidim, Misnagdim, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, every combination. There'll be machlokas on some. Why is everybody fighting? And keep in mind, Rav Kook was well aware that everybody was fighting, because he was often at the tail end of the machlokas. Rav Kook was always attacked by all sorts of people. The secular thought he was too religious, and the religious thought he was not kanoi enough, or whatever it would be. So Rav Kook suffered greatly. Rav Kook was in his shalom, and he suffered greatly from the attacks, from the machlokas, from the bitterness, and the like. And the person asked him, why is there so much fighting here? So Rav Kook said, how come there are so many sick people in hospitals? I thought hospitals are supposed to be where you get better. Why is everybody sick in a hospital? Answer is, people come to hospitals to get better. That's why you're going to see sick people there. So he says, Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'hashkacha brought Balei Machlekes to Eretz Yisrael, because in the course of time, not right away obviously, but in the long run, there'll be a healing of the neshama, and they'll come to Shalom. Now, the truth is, Rav Kook was, among his many beautiful traits, he was an extreme optimist, and he had a very, very positive view of the Jewish soul. In fact, he was connected to Chabad on his mother's side, and he learned the Sifrei Chabad, although he was not a Chabad chassid, but Avish Yisrael, the Pintel Yid. So Rav Kook felt eventually there'll be Shalom. We don't know until Mashiach comes. We honestly don't know. But nevertheless, this was Rav Kook's vision. So I want to end with a story. Somebody sent me, you're going to think I watch YouTubes all day, because I keep on mentioning YouTube videos. I don't watch YouTube that much. But somebody sent me a 6-minute video of Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik of YU, who he was only in Eretz Yisrael once in the 1930s. He never went back to Eretz Yisrael at all. But in that time, he met Rav Kook shortly before Rav Kook's death, and he told a story about Rav Kook, which was very, very interesting. He said that for some reason Rav Soloveitchik found himself. This is the 1930s. He was a young man himself. he found himself in an irreligious kibbutz. And this was not only irreligious, this was Shomer HaTzoir kibbutz. If you know Shomer HaTzoir, they were radical communists, really Stalinist communists. It wasn't just they weren't from. I mean, they were totally anti any type of religion, and they were communists. They were supporters of Stalin. So for some reason he found himself there. He didn't explain why he was there, but he was there, and he said they were kind of making fun of him a little bit. They offered him food. He said, I can't eat anything kashrus. They offered him grapes because they figured that he could eat fruit, and he said, I can't even eat the fruit because trumos and maasros and all these other things. So finally, one of these anti-religious kibbutzniks says to him, you know, Rabbi, our kitchen is 100% kosher, 100% kosher under the best hashgacha. So Rav Soloveitchik said, how could that be? You're Shomer HaTzoir, you're communist, you hate religion. Like, why is your kitchen kosher? He says, because Rav Kook visited us a year ago, and after he left, we made the kitchen kosher. So Rav Soloveitchik said, tell me about this visit. So this is how he describes it. Rav Kook just shows up out of the blue to Shomer HaTzoir kibbutz, and he wants to spend Shabbos with them. So they don't kick him out. They had enough respect for him there. So all he brought with him he brought with himself a bottle of wine and like 3 challahs, 2 for Friday night, whatever. And he sits in the dining room with the kibbutzniks, and he's schmoozing with them. He doesn't say a word of Torah. He makes kiddush, he makes hamotzi. That's all he eats. He sits with them, and they did not do a single thing in respect for him. I mean, they were turning on the lights, they were cooking, they were sewing. They didn't stop anything. They were not embarrassed to be mechalel Shabbos. But Rabbim, okay. The next morning, he requests, could we have a minyan for davening? They said no. so they didn't even give him a minyan. Maybe that's better. Halachically, it's not clear you could be mitzvah for them for a minyan, but they didn't give him a minyan. He davens b'yechidas. Lunch is the same thing. He sits with the kibbutzniks. He makes kiddush. He makes hamotzi. He's schmoozing with them. Not a word of anything. He benches, and then shaloshudas, same thing. He davens b'yechidas. Then Motzei Shabbos, they have a get together. It's not a Malav Malka. It's just a get together, like Israeli songs. They sing folk songs, and Rav Kook dances with them, and he sings the Israeli folk songs. He made Havdalah. Didn't say a word about anything. And the next morning, he leaves, and he just says to them, I hope that one time we'll be able to have a meal together. We can eat together. That would be really nice. Yeah, Rav Kook did talk at the Malav, no, not Malav Malka, at the, whatever it was, the Kumzitz, whatever they wanted to call it. He did talk, but he didn't say any Divrei Torah. He only talked about memories, how hard it is to leave your country. He knows that these people had family in Europe and etc. And Rav Kook talked about his father and his mother and how hard it is, but how beautiful it is to build up Eretz Yisrael and to live in Eretz Yisrael and to, make it your home. And the next morning he just said to them, I hope we can eat together next time. That would be really nice if we could share a meal. And he left. As soon as he left, all the members of the kibbutz simultaneously had the same thought. Nobody even told them, let's make our kitchen kosher. And they went in, they threw out all the dishes, they kashered the pots, they called some rabbi in to kasher it. And this man tells Rav Soloveitchik 2 years later, for 2 years, we've been in an absolutely kosher kitchen because we want to have a meal with Rav Kook next time he shows up. We want to eat together. So Rav Soloveitchik, who, as you may know, was a highly intellectual person. He's the grandson of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and they say the briskers in Eretz Yisrael are the anti-Zionists, and the briskers in America are the Zionists. But whatever. But Rav Soloveitchik obviously was a great Talmud Chacham in his own right. He was the grandson of Rav Chaim that he knew personally. He was the nephew of the Brisker Rav. His own father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Rav Chaim's other son, was a great Talmud Chacham. Rav Soloveitchik was a Gadol, and he knew Gedalim. But he said he never met a person like Rav Kook. He says, people say Rav Kook was a great philosopher. So Rav Soloveitchik said, okay, it's not for me to say. He says he wasn't a philosopher, he was not systematic, so to speak. Rav Soloveitchik was a philosopher. He says he wasn't systematic, he didn't lay out his ideas in this orderly way. He says Rav Kook influenced people not by ideas. He influenced people by his Avas Yisrael and his Avas Torah and his Avas Eretz Yisrael. And he said that was such a contagious love that it kind of changed everybody that came into contact with it. And Rav Soloveitchik says, I don't understand it. He says, I don't understand it. But that was the reality. And he said, he never, with all the great people that Rav Soloveitchik knew, including his family, he says, he never met a person that just changed people by just being in contact. He says, he didn't say a single word of Musar, a single word of Tochacha. He didn't even say, no, I'm not saying that, well, he didn't even say a word of Torah. He didn't even say any different Torah. He just sat with them, he did his thing, and he said, he talked about his parents, he talked about Eretz Yisrael, and then he said, I hope we can eat together next time. That would really be nice. That changed him. So it's kind of an amazing thing when you think about, Mirza Hashem, you guys will one day, many of you will be maybe rabbis, maybe teachers, maybe mekarvim, and those of you that will not be doing so in a professional capacity can still do it in a non-professional capacity, right? Whether you're a lawyer, doctor, accountant, businessman, have people over for Shabbos, learn with people, right? I mean, you don't have to be professional outreach. You can be non-professional outreach, whatever it is. And sometimes I know people say, oh, gee, I can't give the 5 proofs of God, or I can't, I can't have somebody over for Shabbos. He's going to ask me what the Torah says about evolution or whatever. I don't know all that stuff. But you have to know, although, I kind of get stuck in Q&As, always have to talk about these things. But that's not the real thing that turns people on to Judaism. It's good to know, it's learning, it's good to learn and it's good to understand things and it's good to discuss things. That's why we have yeshiva, that's why we learn. But what really gets somebody into the door is the sense that somebody cares about them and somebody loves them. And that's what Rav Kook did. Now, Rav Kook is controversial, I know, in some aspects of the Haredi world, so I'll give you another story from somebody who is unequivocally accepted as one of the great Gedolim in every segment of the Torah world, and that was Rav Chaim Eiser Grodzensky, who was the Gadol Hador in Europe. He was with the Chafetz Chaim, but together Rav Chaim Eiser was a Meshunadik Gadol, not only in terms of his greatness in Torah, but in terms of taking care of Klal Yisrael. During the Holocaust, he died in 1941, towards the beginning, but he was the one who orchestrated all the yeshivos being able to escape to Shanghai. I mean, he arranged all of those things. He had millions of dollars going through his hands for tzedakos. I mean, he was mamish datzala. When he died in 1941, there was a real sense that Hashem took him away because now the worst is going to happen. Because as long as he was alive, his zechus protected the door. When he died, they knew there was an intimation that very, very dark days are ahead. So Rav Chaim Ozer, super genius, super gain, super askan. So there's a story that there was an American representative of the Joint Distribution Committee who was coming to war the European countries that Hitler had not yet occupied, Lithuania, for one, and was giving out charity tzedakah, and he had to meet with Rav Chaim Ozer. And this guy was a physician, actually. His name was Samuel Schmidt from Cincinnati. And he was working for the Joint. And he had to meet with Rav Chaim Ozer to talk about where certain money should be directed. And in the middle of the conversation, Rav Chaim Ozer put his hands on the man's hand. And he said, Dr. Schmidt, do you mind if I call you Reb Shmuel? Is it okay if I call you Reb Shmuel? So Reb is a little bit of a title of respect. So Dr. Schmidt started tearing up a little bit. He said, Rebbe, I don't keep Shabbos. I don't keep kosher. I'm not religious at all. I don't think I should be a Reb. I'm a doctor. That's what I am, but I'm not a Reb Shmuel. So Rabbi Chaim Eiser says, you think you don't deserve to be Reb Shmuel? You're a person who had a comfortable medical practice in Cincinnati, and you risk your life to come to a war zone in Europe to help other Jews and give tzedakah to them. And you're meeting with me about how you can help Jewish people. Do you think I don't respect that? Do you think I'm not machshav you? Do you think Hashem is not machshav you? He says, you're certainly a Reb Shmuel. And Dr. Schmidt, who wrote his memoirs, actually said the day after that meeting, he decided he would become a Shomer Shabbos and Kashrus. Because Rav Chaim Eiser considered him to be worthy of a Reb Yid, he said he was going to live up to it in some way. So Rav Chaim Eiser didn't give him the proofs of God and didn't even talk about how important it is to keep Shabbos. He didn't even mention Shabbos. The only guy who mentioned Shabbos was Dr. Schmidt himself when he said, I'm a Mechal Shabbos. But what he got from Rav Chaim Eiser was a sense of his chashivas, a sense of he was worthy in the eyes of Hashem. And that is what brought him to mitzvahs. That is what brought him to Torah. That's how Rav Kook, granted, the Shomer HaTzair kibbutz did not become religious, but they kashered their kitchen for that reason. And this is a big, big mafteach. I think it's a big, big yesod. Maybe you've experienced that in your own lives, but whatever it would be, as you help other people, this is what you always have to very much keep in mind. Okay? All right, Shabbi, take care.